And we're recording, according to my iMac. We're on. Thank you, everyone, for joining me again for one of my webinar interviews. I keep getting fantastic guests, and with me, this is actually round two. The first time my guest and I today taped this for the first time in any interview I've ever done, ever, in all these interviews, my computer failed to record what we were doing. So we're doing sort of take two in this, and we were both kind of happy about it because we both made some mistakes first time around, and I don't know how to edit anything. So I'm not fancy. My friend Marcus Grodine, he's got staff that can do that. I have a tech guy, but I won't inflict that on him. So anyway, this is round two. My guest today is Robert Mixa. He is the St. Elizabeth Ann Seton Fellow for Catholic Education at Word on Fire, a master's degree from the John Paul II Institute in Washington, D.C. for Studies in Marriage and Family in Washington, D.C. on sort of biotechnology, ethics, and all that kind of stuff. And he's just an interesting fellow, lives in Dallas, Texas. You know, just little side note. I've only been in Dallas once. It was for a conference, and I had to go to Dealey Plaza. That's all I can say, where Kennedy was shot. And I was struck by how small Dealey Plaza actually is. You know, you watch the Zapruder film and the scenes of the, you get this sense that it's far more expansive than it is, but it's actually this very, very small area down there. So anyway, I hate to bring up Dallas and the Kennedy assassination because I'm sure people in Dallas don't like that association. So anyway, let's get started. I want to start with the fact that you are called the St. Elizabeth Ann Seton Fellow for Catholic Education at Word on Fire. And of course, I went to Mount St. Mary's in Emmitsburg, Maryland Seminary, and that's where St. Elizabeth Ann Seton was. And the Seton Shrine is just down the road in Emmitsburg. I'm going to be in Emmitsburg Monday, visiting my friend Bill Portier. And so I'm very familiar with St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, but she was known basically for elementary education and not, higher education. But your focus isn't on elementary education. Your focus is more on the higher levels of education. Am I right?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say like university, college level, but yeah, when they gave me the title, I mean, I was thankful because I think of all the fellows, I'm the only one with the saint. So I was grateful for that. But I mean, I always grew up with the associating St. Elizabeth Ann Seton with like elementary level education or homeschooling. And so I kind of like freaked out, thinking like, oh gosh, people are going to come to me thinking I know much about that stuff, which you'd have to talk to my wife and her friends to get the expert opinion on that. But yeah, I'm more focused on, like, I would say high school and I mean, I always kind of dreamed of being a college professor. So I think my students, they understood that. So they put up with me. So not a college professor, but I'm sure a lot of the things I say are applicable to the colleges. So,
well, you'd be a good college professor, and it is. It's a nice life, I have to say. It's a cushy life, and any professors watching this is going to get mad at me. They'll say, "Well, hey, what about all the grading and so on?" Well, I just have 3 words for you: June, July, and August. There's one aspect of the cushiness of the university life. But anyway, I don't want to go down that road. Let's talk about education. We're going to deal with that first. I want to talk after education. I want to talk a little bit about technology and education, and then I do want to talk a little bit about the overall vision of Word on Fire ministry, and sort of what it's about. But anyway, education. I think it's sort of by now a sort of commonplace among most people that modern Catholic education. Your typical Catholic high school or even in Catholic colleges and universities, that there's a crisis in Catholic higher education. Would you agree with that? And if you do, what do you think is the fundamental essence of that crisis?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think one of the reasons I mean, you could use the word crisis is because I think most people come at education with the secular understanding of it. And then religion, if you want to say Catholicism, is kind of tacked on. So it's, the whole thing in some ways isn't Catholic. So the whole education isn't like kind of ordered according to the whole, a transcendent whole. And I think part of the problem, at least a lot of the things that I kind of write about, I think have this as its theme, is that the crisis is actually an anthropological crisis. I remember at the John Paul II Institute, Dr. Atkinson said the contemporary heresy is an anthropological heresy. And I know you have a blog called Gaudium et Spes 22. So, like, one of the things that I see is really perhaps helping education, Catholic education, get back on track is to have a robust theological anthropology rooted in what was the kind of the communio vision that you could say was articulated in part at Vatican II. And so I think that a lot of the education is in a crisis because it doesn't know what its ultimate end is. It's the kind of, we talked about this last time. It's forgotten the telos of education. And so it's kind of become a little bit of a technocratic thing. Also, it's just orientated to, getting a job, that's fine. I mean, everybody we should be able to provide an education so that people have the skills to fill certain positions. But the kind of the logic of reality that, Christ in some ways illumines is missing. And I don't think we have many teachers who are trained in that. So what we need to do is we need to have institutes. I think UD, I know Benedictine College, and even CUA, they're founding new institutes to help train future educators in this robust Catholic philosophy of education.
Yeah, that's it. We have to begin in some ways on the university level to train people in various disciplines, this integrated and a more holistic Catholic vision, so that they can then integrate their discipline into that broader vision, and to realize that it makes their discipline more itself, not less itself. Okay.
Yes.
So go ahead.
Gaudium et Spes 36, or
yes.
What is? Yeah, I mean. Yeah. And Michael Hamby, I mean, you mentioned John Paul II Institute.
Yeah, this is Communio Theology 101. It's De Lubac 101, Ratzinger 101, Balthasar 101.
Yeah.
The closer you get to God, the more human you become, not less human you become.
Yeah.
The natural world needs to be completed in the supernatural world, but in so being completed, it actually becomes more natural, more itself.
Yeah.
And it's the same. I don't become a worse mathematician by being a devout Catholic that integrates his math into a broader theological vision. I become a better mathematician. That's the message.
Yes.
Right there. And that's the message that's been lost, I think, to a great extent because of the spillover into the Catholic Church in general and Catholic education in particular, the spillover from political liberalism, which has sequestered and privatized religion, domesticated it, turned it into an utterly private and sort of subjective affair on the level of choosing a hamburger over a fish sandwich. Okay. It doesn't matter. And that's why we can grant it freedom, just like we're not going to regulate whether you choose cheeseburgers over fish sandwiches. We're not going to regulate your choice of religion, but that has privatized religion. Yeah. And that is what shows up then in the Catholic university or Catholic high school. We'll have our theology department or our religion department, but that's all to teach our kids piety and catechism crap. Meanwhile, the rest of the
Jesus
school,
sprinkles, right?
The Jesus sprinkles that Bill Portier talks about. We'll just. I always tell the story at DeSales University, and I don't want to dominate the conversation. I will get back to my guest eventually, but
keep going, Larry. I love it.
All right. So when I was at DeSales University, they built this brand new building. It's called the Gambit Center, named after a former president who I loved. He just passed away. Great man. But anyway, it's the business center as well as the medical science center. So anyway, they have this mock stock exchange room with the Wall Street stock sticker, fake thing up. Well, it's not fake. It's a real stock ticker and all that. And you can see it through this big glass window. It's very impressive, actually. Mm-hmm. But what struck me when I first took the tour and saw it was right above that stock ticker, that ribbon board, was a crucifix. And I remember thinking, well, that's a bit, I thought, well, this is like Jesus sprinkles. I thought of Bill Portier immediately. Jesus sprinkles, absolutely, because I doubt that our business department, in other words, teaches business any differently than Harvard or, Penn State or any other secular place. So this is sort of just showing the whole world we're pretty much the same as everybody, but we do believe in Jesus. So we're gonna tack Jesus up there. And I remember thinking that's kind of emblematic of what's wrong with Catholic education.
Yeah, and this is why I'm like really attracted to guys like you had Bill Cavanagh on, and I
Mm-hmm.
remember like reading an article by him about the dispute at the Notre Dame Business School like years ago, and how it kind of became the typical you know way of teaching economics in all the other secular institutions. But what's really interesting about guys like him is he shows how everything, and this is why I'm really attracted to the likes of like Schindler. I'll put Milbank in there as well, but everything's kind of embedded, right? So the students are probably not learning, well, okay, what's the philosophy of money that's operative here? And then they're doing the kind of analysis of, well, what's that presupposing about the human being? Well,
Yeah.
what's
Yeah.
this picture presupposing
Yeah.
about reality, about God? And so I think part of the things that we could do is actually to show how all those things, everything's embedded ultimately, with at the end of the day is like who is God is the question you answer. And so everything is kind of, I think students are desiring that. That's what I always try to do when I was teaching, was to show them kind of to do an analysis like that, to take their typical view of what, reality is and say, well, at the end of the day, it's just economics, man. Well, then to really break that apart and as you say, Larry, to flip the script
Yeah.
on
Like
them.
Larry David. I'm flipping the script. Yeah.
Yeah, Larry David, curb your enthusiasm. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whenever you say that, I always think of of Leon Black saying that to Larry. You gotta flip it, Larry.
Got to flip it. Got to flip it.
Yeah, but anyways, yeah. So I think most of the teachers aren't trained to think that way.
No.
And what my school, when I was teaching, did is we had a lot of time for conversation. They had a lot teacher meeting days, right? And I remember one of them, they got all the teachers from different departments talking. And so they broke up the theology department. And I was sitting with mostly I think math teachers, science teacher, literature teachers. And I think they had us read something by Pope Benedict. And I think I remember at the time, like they didn't say it was Pope Benedict, but I was getting all excited because I saw like the logos everywhere about in education. And so the teachers, this was something radically new to them because most of them had a secular training in education. And so they never knew how to kind of fit Catholicism in with what they were doing. And I remember just talking to some of the teachers about the more ancient mathematical tradition, like going back to Pythagoras. And we got to talking about Donald Duck Goes to Magic Math Land. We talked about this last time, Larry. I don't know. Did you watch the video of Donald Duck?
No, to be honest with you, I totally forgot we talked this. I'm glad you brought this up because I have to go look this up now.
Yeah.
I have to find it.
Well,
so tell the viewers what you're talking about.
Well, it's a classic. I mean, it's on YouTube, and it's like, I think probably from the 1950s, but Donald Duck is hunting and he's chasing down numbers, but then he goes into this like mysterious world of mathematics and he meets Pythagoras, but it really opens up this kind of ancient tradition that, the likes of like, Stratford Caldecott is getting at in.
Yeah.
But the teachers, they knew, that math and that music is like based in math. And then, mathematics almost has a say on almost everything, but they weren't trained to like think about it further than just that. And so what that video did for them, I had them all watch it, I think at the table there, was it kind of gave them a sense of mystery about the cosmos. And it was like almost like an enchanted cosmos. And they actually came back to me later saying that they really appreciated that. And they actually saw how what I'm doing, because they always thought I was the weird religion teacher. Like, actually, like, why are you really here? Is this really like theology? Is this a serious thing today?
Oh, I know.
Or just like that subjectivist, kind of nothing wrong with the subject?
What is it you do in class? Memorize Bible stuff?
Yeah, I know. I always felt like an oddball. I'm walking into a Catholic school, but they really appreciated it. And some of them actually got interested in theology. So
I once had a business teacher at DeSales ask me, now, how is it that you guys in theology give out grades? I mean, how could you even test over stuff like that?
yeah.
And what are we making? Clothespin Jesuses and dioramas of the resurrection, finger painting in class or something? I mean, come on,
Balloons and banners, you know.
Yeah. That's the image of it. But I think you said something very interesting very early on in your description there, where you said the students are actually interested in this. And actually, in talking about your Donald Duck thing, so can the teachers be interested in this. One of the common phenomena the theology teacher often runs up against is a student comes into class with a chip on their shoulder because they don't want to take a theology class. And they have all these stereotypes in their head is about the Catholic Church, about Christianity, about the Bible, about what theology class. And of course, they view it as it's just going to be some sort of heavy-handed, oppressive BS about, keep your zipper up and let's all be chaste and moral and suck on green lemons and be sour and dour. And and then by the end of the semester, they're darn near theology department groupies. They love you. And they write on your evaluations that, I came in here thinking this is going to be the worst class of my life. And it ended up being my favorite class of all time. And the reason is because precisely what you just said. They hear things that they've never heard before. And they're now able to view their wider education in a broader context that they never thought of it before. And human beings being spiritually thirsty animals, it actually does appeal to. So this notion that is out there that this is a marketing non-starter to actually create an education that rounds out the student towards transcendence, towards the gospel, that this is a marketing dud, I think is a false idea. I think it is I think the notion that this is going to be sort of a very, very, very confessional school where girls have to wear dresses below their knees and all that kind of Catholic Amish stuff. Nobody wants that except a very, very few. But I think that marketing people simply are not trained themselves. What do you think?
Well, I don't think they look at a lot of these surveys, right? And then they develop their plan according to what people tell them. But people just don't know about this stuff. And so, like, what I would do is the students, day one, I would ask them, well, like, why are they here? I mean, I would get them to if you call it a Socratic dialogue with them, just like, why am I here? Why are you here? Well, like, what are we doing? And like, then all of a sudden, well, they always go at a job and make money. And then I'd say, well, why do you want to do that? And then further and further and further. And ultimately they'd come to kind of like the conclusion, well, God or nothing. And it's in some ways that you mentioned Blondell with Father Harrison, kind of having this like imminent like way of getting at the transcendent was like appealing to them. It wasn't heavy-handed, but it made sense to things. And I had so many students come because I brought most of my books. Some of the students never returned my books, but actually that was good though. I actually like that because I'm like, okay, well, they like some of this stuff, I think.
Oh, if I ever loaned a book to a student and they didn't return them, I hunted them down like stray dogs. I gun in hand. Oh, no, shoot, I shouldn't say that. YouTube will ban me. No, that's a metaphor.
I forgive you, Larry.
Yeah. But I was very proprietary about my books.
Yeah. Well,
I know what you mean. You're actually glad that they thought enough of the book to keep it.
Yeah. I think that was a David Bentley Hart book, which I like that one. That was the Experience of God.
That's a great book.
Oh yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, I think all of David Hart's books are fantastic. I don't always agree with him.
Yeah.
But man, you have to contend with him. But that's a whole different show for another day. I'd love to get David Hart if you're watching, and he's not. I'd love to have him on here.
Well, David Hart, if you are watching, I'll tell you at Word on Fire, we talk about you nearly every day. And so I've got another colleague who is reading everything David Bentley Hart writes and disagrees. But I secretly love David Bentley Hart.
Okay.
I'm like a Spinozist. I can't say it publicly that I actually love this stuff.
Let's stop. I
just did. So
no. I'm going to say this. Okay. uh, because sometimes when you teach, you're in the middle of a lecture and a topic comes up and you say, you know what, I want to talk about this. To hell with what I was going to talk about today.
Well,
And so, no, we'll keep on with our conversation about education, but I do want to stop because I love David Bentley Hart too. I just got his book on nature and grace. Hang on a second.
Supernatural, what's it called?
Hang on. It's right here.
I only read the first chapter, but
here it is. You Are Gods. All right.
Oh, yeah.
This is his analysis of the whole Catholic nature and grace debate, which, as an Orthodox theologian, Eastern Orthodox, is very interesting because typically this is an intra-Catholic Thomistic debate more than anything, this whole nature and grace debate. But nevertheless, he has found it somewhat interesting. But I haven't read that book yet, but I'm ready to dive into it. I got into trouble in my blog because I gave a very sympathetic reading to his book on universal salvation, that all shall be saved. Yeah. I think, and I'm just going to publicly say this, and then we can get back on track, and maybe you can or cannot comment. I think the arguments he presents in that book are irrefutable. I have seen many Catholics attempt to refute his arguments in that book, and I've seen many Catholics who have so attempted fail to address his arguments in that book. Now, as a Catholic, I have dogmatic commitments to the eternity of hell, its reality, that there's no post-mortem conversion possible. Hart says post-mortem conversion is definitely possible, and hell is real, but it isn't eternal. Okay? And he gives reasons for that I find. And then, of course, he has translated the New Testament himself from Greek, and he knows the Greek very well. And his contention is that when the New Testament speaks of the eternity of hell, it doesn't mean everlasting. It means to the end of a certain age, right? To the end of a certain era, the era of purification. So in other words, for Hart, hell is purgatory. Mm-hmm. Hell is purgatorial. So I'm just going to toss that out there, all right? And my viewers can get into trouble. I remain a Catholic in these views. I affirm the Church's dogmatic tradition. But as a theologian, I'm going to step back and say, this guy's written a book that I can't refute. I'm just going to say it. As a theologian, I still hold the Balthazar's Dare We Hope. But I think Hart's stuff isn't. Anyway, what do you think?
Well, I'll just confess here. I haven't fully read that book, partially because I'm a little afraid. I mean, I got it on Hoopla, and so I was listening to it, and it's not the best way to read a book, but I was going through, because it's like a series of almost meditations, right? And I'm going
through meditations, yeah,
and I'm like extremely sympathetic to it, and I know like he doesn't like Balthazar either with the Dare We Hope. I mean,
he thinks it doesn't go far enough. Yeah,
doesn't go far enough, and I still kind of like I don't know. As a Catholic, right? You don't want to go all the way, but yes, I was very sympathetic. I mean, the first thing I read of David Bentley Hart's was The Experience of God, and I just fell in love with that. And then his writings, and he's extremely witty. I mean, some people complain about his style of writing, but I
love it.
It flows, yeah, for me.
I love it.
I used his story of Christianity for partially for my church history class, and I gave the students some handouts or copies from that book, and I thought he just opens up the Christian thing very well. I mean, it's very compelling.
Yeah, he does. So I first read his book, The Beauty of the Infinite, which may or may not have been.
Yes, I have that
part of his doctoral thesis. I don't know, but that was an excellent book. And then, The Experience of God, of course. And
well, the thing is, like, what I like with David Bentley Hart is the eschaton. Okay, he always focuses on the eschaton. I mean, it's the ultimate. Where is everything going? And in some sense, when I'm reading. So like one summer I got his New Testament, and I read just all of Paul's letters, like David Bentley Hart's translation. I felt like, Paul was kind of there too. At least as David Bentley Hart translates him. But in education, I'm like, the students, they want to know, where's the drama? Where is it all going? And like,
Yeah.
did Jesus? What did Jesus do? Did Jesus
Okay.
I mean, are we waiting? What is our hope based in? So I know it's hope. Okay, this is the thing I'm a little bit worried about, like whether or not like David Bentley Hart allows for that. But I don't know. That Beauty of the Infinite is a great
It's a
book
great
as
book.
well. So,
But I agree with you. The eschatological focus, now to bring this back to education, is exactly what our Catholic educational establishment lacks. There's no overarching teleology or sense of where are we all headed. But my experience is that this is what students want to know.
they do,
This is
yeah.
precisely not what they need. This is what they want. They want to know these things. And thus, when you present them with an integrated vision, the integrated, full-orbed Christian vision, that isn't some parsimonious smackdown with a lot of hell cowbell tossed in, that they actually deeply respond to it.
Yeah.
And if your message to them is, here's where we're all going. There's heaven, there's hell. You better get on board the heaven train because hell's waiting for you. And so that sort of fear-mongering approach to things, I don't think works at all, because we are not made for hell. We're made for heaven. And the fact is, that's what unlocks the mystery of humanity.
Yeah, and this is why Bishop Barron's approach in evangelization, I think, is right.
Yes.
And I mean, when I was teaching, I had all of my students, no matter what class I was teaching, memorize this like definition of the I think the liturgy by David Fagerberg, which I just absolutely love. The liturgy is the Trinity's perichoresis canonically extended to include our synergistic ascent into deification. I knew they were like, what the heck is this? Wow. But I had them memorize it. I mean, memorization sometimes is good.
Yes.
And I said, well, where's it all going? And they never heard of this word deification before. And I never heard of it growing up as a Catholic either. And it wasn't until I had a teacher, Father David McConey at St. Louis University, who's all about deification and St. Augustine, that I was like, oh my gosh, how can you not be a Catholic? I mean, it's either, as David Bentley Hart titled one of his articles, it's either Christ or nothing.
Yeah. In First Things, I'm writing a book for Ignatius Press right now. I quote that article right off the bat. It's the article is actually called Christ and Nothing.
Christ and Nothing. Okay.
But he later in the article says Christ or nothing. But so I think it means the same thing. I just correct that in case people go look for it. But
no, thanks.
Google in David Hart Christ and Nothing. I'm sure if you wrote in Christ or Nothing, it would come up too. But anyway, that's a small point. The thing is, that's a great article, and he's absolutely right. The people are surrounded today, and our education needs to take this into account, with nihilism. The sort of it goes way beyond relativism and into a nihilistic what I call the nullification of God, which is far more insidious than simply straight up atheism, an overt, almost hostile rejection of the very concept of God. A far deeper problem is simply the nullification of the question as in any way, shape, or form relevant or interesting or important. And our entire modern culture, it seems to me, an educational system, is predicated on the idea that God is utterly irrelevant to this process. And sadly, Catholic schools, more or less on a sliding scale, but Catholic schools have kind of bought into this ideology.
No, I agree. And the only way that you'd make sense of the students like progressing towards anything is if God is in the picture.
But here's the problem. Okay, so this cannot remain atomized then in the religion department or the theology department. That's kind of one of the problems I had with Ex Corde Ecclesiae, that document from John Paul II on education. That so emphasized theologians getting the mandatum, as it's called, the sort of canonical mandate to teach theology from their bishop in a local Catholic school. And I'm all in favor of that. That's great. But I knew from the get-go, number one, that it would be ineffective. People would ignore it. Or what happened with many bishops, they just issued a carte blanche mandatum to everybody in their diocese without further ado. And so it was ineffective. But also on a deeper philosophical level, what struck me was this is a way that's really actually kind of counterproductive, because what you're doing then is isolating the Catholic identity of a Catholic university in the theology department. and saying these people must have the mandatum. And it wasn't a great deal of discussion about this broader vision of Catholic. It's there. It is there. I think a better document for understanding what needs to be done in the Catholic education from John Paul would be Veritatis, Splendor of Truth, the Splendor of Truth, because therein is the document about faith and reason. That I think that's what's needed is this. So anyway, I'm meandering, but the point I want to make here now, and I want to get your opinion, is that, as I often say, personnel is policy. You can have all the structures, all the rules, but personnel is policy. Okay, so if you don't want your Catholic identity atomized in a few individuals in the theology department, if you want it to be cross-curriculum, it means you have to hire people that think this way. Now, on a high school or college level, how easy? My guess is that's an exceptionally difficult thing to do.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any like easy solution right now. But I think we talked about last time, you need to hire people who are at least not hostile to the faith. So, I mean, at least like you mentioned, you had a great dialogue with, was it somebody from the economics or
the politics department? I'll just bring this up because one of the gems from our unrecorded conversation was your idea that you brought up that the transformation. In other words, personnel is policy, and so we've got a problem on our hands. But if you hire people who are at least not hostile to the faith, you can at least begin a conversation amongst the teachers, amongst the professors, and build up a sort of community of discourse. And I remember there was a politics teacher at DeSales, utter secularist, agnostic fellow, nice enough guy. I kind of liked him, very pleasant. But he wasn't a believer, and he taught politics in the usual way. But then Obama came out with the mandate, the contraception mandate, that Catholic institutions had to put it in their insurance policy. And I remember Rodney Hauser and I were sitting somewhere discussing this with the politics teacher, who has since retired. And he disagreed, and we had this interesting conversation about why we opposed the mandate, and he was interested in hearing more. So we began this email exchange that lasted for days, and we were composing these extremely long, erudite emails. So long story short, when this professor retired about 6 or 7 years ago, I had already quit DeSales, but Rodney told me that he stood up on the floor of the faculty to say, in a sense, I'm retiring, goodbye, a sort of end-of-the-year meeting. And he said, the thing I'm going to miss the most are the intellectual conversations that I had with my colleagues. And then he singled out that set of email conversations that Rodney and I had with him and said, I have to say, in my entire adult life as an academic, I've never had a more meaningful, deeply fulfilling intellectual conversation in my life than I had with Larry and Rodney.
Yeah.
And that struck me. Like I was just spouting some stuff. I was just doing my communio thing on the keyboard, and yet he found it just eye-opening, and it's like, wow, I've never heard this kind of stuff before. Anyway, so it goes to your point about the need to build a community of discourse.
Yeah, and it's philosophical in nature, because everybody who's in their own little department, they're in some part, but they want the whole to make sense of the part. So they desire to understand. So I think, keeping that in mind and hiring people who are not hostile to the faith, who it's going to take an awful lot of work to try to at least make any difference there. And in fact, they probably will, no matter what they're teaching, subtly try to undermine the faith during the class with the students. So that creates like the students pick up on that stuff. But the thing too is, I think the theology department is the most important department because I think the theology department can also do the most harm, and the greatest good for this school. I grew up with schools. I mean, I had some really great teachers. I went through Catholic schools for most of my life. But I always noticed the theology teachers, it always seemed like they were out to make you an enemy of the church of some kind. And, it was like this this really boring, as I mean, we call it like a beige Catholicism. And it was actually some of the teachers who really were trained in this more, if you want to say, communal way, that it really attracted me. And you mentioned Veritatis Splendor. I mean, they really presented the form of Christ, the beauty of Christ. And everybody was actually hanging out afterwards, trying to talk more, to have the conversation going a little bit. And so that was something I set out to do. I mean, I'm sure a lot, if students are listening to this, some of them will probably say, well, it didn't work. The students I did not like were the ones who always were like, when are you going to put the grades in? What's on the test? What should I be writing right now? Like notes? I'm like, come on, let's talk. Let's have a conversation here. Yeah. And the students actually who were the atheists who kind of were like really, they were just schools. They didn't have any discipline. They were actually some of my favorite students because they were at least interested. And in fact, I don't know what they're doing with their lives today. Some of them actually told me at the very end, because I had them for a couple of years, and they all took the philosophy course I taught too. And they were like, Mr. Mixa, actually, my parents are really angry with me, but I think also with you, because I want to go study philosophy now. And like, they're like, he's ruining your life. But don't worry. I think you'll all work.
I got that message a lot from parents, like, stop turning my kid towards theology and philosophy, because now they're going to want to major in that, and we don't want them to. I highly encourage people to major in theology, but I always tell them double major in something else, both to assuage the fears of your parents, but also because church work is poverty work. And so unless you're just doing this you're independently wealthy and you want to round out your education, then you really in other words, I am sympathetic to the idea that modern education does to a certain extent have to prepare people for the workaday world. But that doesn't preclude, it's not an either that or you emphasize the humanities and that sort of thing. You can do both. Yes. But I want to go back to the nature of theology or religion teachers. My experience is in my encounters with them is that they're either or a combination of angry, weird jerks. Sometimes not always jerks, but at least angry and weird. and are
the jerks? Okay, I'll let you go on.
The jerks tend to be the right wingers.
Okay,
and the angry ones are both the right wingers and the left wingers, because they both have a vision of the church that doesn't match up with the actual church, and so they're constantly trying to form the church into their own image and likeness based on some ideology. Amongst the progressives, usually some sort of secularist, they don't think it's secular, but some secularist ideology about LGBTQ or whatever, let's push the church that way. And of course, the right wingers simply want to roll the clock back to the 19th century, retrieve the syllabus of errors, put wives back in their place, all that. It's a caricature. I can see the hate mail I'm going to get now. And so that doesn't move the needle for anybody, because that's all ideology. And then they tend to be weird. Mm-hmm. So many theology teachers are just out of it. They just tend to be weird. And so like some of my favorites.
Eccentric is good though.
Eccentric, there's good eccentric and there's bad eccentric.
Yeah.
Good eccentric is not an affect. It's not something you put on. It's something just natural to you, and that's fine.
That's right.
Bad eccentric is when you go from being sort of eccentric to the world to being eccentric to just even normal personality. You become so socially untuned that you just can't even relate to human beings on any existential level worth talking about.
I know,
but
and they're the ones proclaiming that the point of Christ is kind of tune you. Get you back in tune with the nature of reality, and they seem to be the ones most out of tune.
So you eventually have to be concentric to something. Like Balthasar always said, to be concentric to Christ is to be eccentric to the world. You have to have some concentric aspect to your personality that's the sort of fulcrum upon which the whole thing turns. Otherwise, you're just some sort of dissipated nitwit. who's lost in some arcane subdiscipline that nobody cares about. Then anyway, the point is that a theology teacher has to be human. And like you said, some of my favorite students were like the agnostics, the atheists, the sort of worldly kids, and because they kind of dug my class or whatever, and they were the ones with the chip on their shoulder when they came in, and when they went out, it's like, yeah, this was great. And I would, we could just let them talk, and we'd have these great conversations. The students I didn't like, and now I'm going to get hate mail again, were the sort of pinched up uber devotional Catholic kids who didn't understand what I was trying to do in the classroom. And I'd get these emails from them saying, why are you always bending over backwards towards all the non-believing students? Why are you always being so accommodating to the pagans in the class? And so on and so forth. Well, I should send them your email, and now you know what they would know why. That kind of mentality is also in some teachers.
Yeah.
Who come into the class and thinking, I need to disabuse these kids of all kinds of stupid ideas about, and then they just do it in a heavy-handed way. But anyway, I don't think
it's a reaction. I mean, growing up with a lot of silliness, when you're kind of young and naive, I mean, I bet you my former colleagues probably think I did this. You come in there thinking, oh, well, you start hearing the things like the way they talk about the faith, and you get all angry. And you're like, man, this has gone so far. I'm going to straighten things out. And you just end up making a bunch of enemies with your colleagues, but also with the students. And you really don't do much good.
Well, see, here's the great turnaround in my intellectual formation that the Ressourcement Communio theologians provided to me to sort of bring it back to them, which is this. I was like that as a young man. I grew up in the silly season of post-Vatican II. And in my world, there were two types of people: liberals, the bad guys, and conservative Catholics, the good guys. And all we needed was to enforce doctrinal purity from Rome, moral purity from Rome, and that would settle the problem.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, when I was pursuing my undergraduate degree in philosophy at a seminary, I neglected to study any sort of modern philosophy, which I just dismissed as so much error. I just wanted to dive into Aquinas. And that was great. I learned a lot of Aquinas. That's why I know Aquinas inside and out. But it was later in life on the PhD level where I suddenly, started really diving into the Communio guys, the Ressourcement guys, that I began to realize modern philosophy is wrong about a lot of things, but it's also right about a lot of things. In other words, and what they have right is that they're asking some very good questions. They're asking some very right questions. They get the answers wrong because they don't have Christ, but they're not asking bad questions. And what the Communio Ressourcement guys did was that they took up those questions and they answered them.
Yes. Yeah.
In a way that sort of expanded the categories of Catholic thought, which is why they're accused of modernism by the trads, which isn't true. But
wow, that's such an umbrella term. I think everybody fits in that.
The trads that use the word modernist don't know what it means.
Yeah.
You know what it means to them? It means anybody that doesn't follow the deductive rationalistic method of the scholastics, which ironically is far more modern than that's kind of Father Harrison Eyre in the last interview talked about how he thinks a lot of the traditionalists, all the neo-Thomists, are very Kantian because they like to make that same Kantian distinction between the noumenal and the phenomenal. That you got things you can prove and things you can't. Let's put it that way. The limits of reason are basically and so what the neo-scholastics like to do is they simply like to stay in the room. What can we prove rationalistically and deductively? Well, that's a very modern project.
Yeah.
It neglects the role of the church as mystery. God is mystery. Christ is mystery, and the way the fathers and others have unpacked it. That's what the Communio guys unleash. And that's what we need more of in education, it seems to me, is more this sense of theology. Yeah, you have to have doctrinal purity on some level as a baseline. No one's, neither you nor I nor Word on Fire, anybody's calling for all kinds of heterodox experimentation.
Yeah.
No, you've got to have doctrines and dogmas, and they're your baseline. But the key is, how narrowly are you going to interpret those things? What kind of a matrix are you going to place them in?
Yeah, and often going back to kind of the Kantian thing, I mean, knowing Hegel's response is really, really important. Like
Yeah.
to know that a line's already to be beyond it in some way. I mean, and then also, I mean, if you look at like Heidegger, some of the things, I know a lot of people just will read one thing Heidegger wrote, not understanding why he's writing in this way, and just find it to be a bunch of nonsense. And perhaps it is, okay, not defending Heidegger, but
But
I do think that they're worth engaging. I mean, asking the question, why is there something rather than nothing, to bring back the relevance of, even if you say going beyond metaphysics, but it returns us to the place that we need to be.
Yeah.
And so this is why I was so attracted to Balthasar when I first started reading him. I mean, the first time I read Balthasar was like right after college. I never heard of Balthasar de Lubac, never read anything by Ratzinger in college. And I took a lot of theology classes in college. And granted, SLU is like historical theology, and so they're not going to really get into the like a lot of the communio stuff right now. But what attracted to me was I wrote my undergrad thesis on John Paul II, and I just loved how he wasn't afraid to delve with these thinkers like Max Scheler. At the end of the day, not agreeing with him, finding something Kant said, especially in his critique of practical reason?
Yeah.
Or finding some of the stuff there to be just brilliant. So
it is, yeah.
I mean, I think that like we talked last time about the importance of subjectivity. I mean, perhaps you don't find that as much in the Middle Ages being stressed. And so perhaps we can use the categories of like a Thomas Aquinas, who in some ways has something like a nuptial epistemology,
Sure.
to see, well, actually the moderns may help us better understand Aquinas. And Aquinas is strange. Aquinas is strange. I oftentimes don't think that one of my colleagues, he's doing a lot of this biblical Thomism stuff. And some of the people are looking at the things he's taken out of Thomas, and they can't believe that they sometimes question, did Thomas actually, is that Thomas? Because it doesn't fit their image of what Thomas Aquinas
Right, exactly.
says. So
well, that's why the last person to be a Thomist would have been St. Thomas.
Yeah.
Because he integrated all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he got into trouble for bringing Aristotle into the equation. So, yeah, I mean, I love Thomas, Balthasar quoted Thomas more than any other author.
Yeah.
The problem is this sort of caricature and this sort of calcification of his thinking in the church is problematic. So I would say this, let's bring it back to education again. In other words, what's to be done? That's all well and good. We got two guys here conversing of communio theology who are saying we need more communio theology, more communio cowbell. That's what we need. Okay. So, okay, okay, good for you guys. Now let's back to the real world, and we have to build a school. Okay, so in terms of a long-term vision, a long-term project, I think part of the unfinished business of Vatican II is not spent. It's barely been tried.
Yeah,
is that the Ressourcement project that it started, the Communio project it started, needs to be completed. That's the vision that needs, and John Paul tried, Benedict tried, Francis in his own way tries, but it's not been completed. So my thinking is this: we need to reform the Theological Guild, and the way we need to do this is to get Catholic universities in Europe, North America, other places, to start hiring Communio-minded theologians to build theology departments around, not exclusively, you got to have a multiplicity, a pluralism of the communio voice isn't the only voice, and I'm not saying that it is.
Yeah.
But the reason why I think the church needs to be producing more and more and more of these sorts of ressourcement communio type thinkers is precisely because we need integrators. We need theology and professors on the university level, religion teachers in high school. We need them to be the catalysts and the facilitators to bring it full back of that conversation that you have been talking about. That needs to happen in these schools amongst the teachers and so on. Only if there are people at those schools that can do the integrating can that kind of a dialogue happen. Otherwise, it's just going to be two ships passing in the night.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I fear though that some people will not actually though respect the proper hierarchy as well. So like
Yeah.
oftentimes it'll just be like two departments just talking to each other, but that's fine. Yeah, I agree that the Communio school needs to. There, most universities don't have people teaching that line of thought.
Well, and it
And
doesn't, no, they don't. And it doesn't all have to be systematic theology. What it can
yeah,
be would be a biblical scholar who is very well versed in communio
yeah,
approaches, a patristic scholar who's very well versed in communio approaches. And so what you find is across disciplines is an integrated vision of the church as a communion. I
yeah,
mean, communio comes from Vatican II's teaching of a kind of communion ecclesiology. And
yeah.
so that's what I'm calling for. It's not going to happen.
I,
It's
I
not.
think the
It's not
study
going to happen.
groups. I remember in DC when the Schindlers would host a Communio reading group, and my wife and I would go. I
Yeah.
mean, I would meet people from the most interesting people in all these different fields.
Yes.
I mean, one of my best friends, Connor Dugan, is like,
Hey,
I mean,
Connor.
yeah, hey Connor, I'll text you later. Connor, Connor's a lawyer, an excellent lawyer, but he's well versed in Communio.
He sure is.
Yeah, and
He
so,
schools me sometimes. He sends me those little private messages. Have you seen this? It's like,
yeah,
oh, no, I haven't.
but and I've got another friend who's in the fundraising world, another friend who actually does like urban design, and they're all interested in Communio. And so I think that I think the first step, those study groups are really important, and there should be more inviting people, like just practically trying to get as many people into these things as possible.
Hauser and I started one at DeSales, and when I was hired there in '94, I think Rodney was hired in 2000, and within just 1 or 2 years, we started up this study circle, and it started with just basically the members of the Theology and Philosophy Department getting together in somebody's house to discuss an article.
Yeah.
But then it became, well, some of the other professors wanted to come too, some of the more, friendly to Catholicism. So they came. And then it became like a few of our better students got wind of these conversations. And so they wanted to come. And so they came. And then they started bringing their friends. Well, long story short, it ended up, these Communio study circles, which usually met about 3 times a semester, was not at all unusual to have 40 or 50 students show up, and several faculty members, and then of course after the official session was over, the conversation would go on until 2:00 in the morning over beer and pizza or whatever. That is an irreplaceable part of education. That I would submit to you, Robert, that's where real education is happening.
And
outside of the classroom.
Yeah, and like with my generation, like let's just call it like the JP2 generation. My fear is that we don't properly understand John Paul II, and we sometimes reduce him to kind of a sentimentalized. Please don't quote me, but sentimentalized view of the theology of the body and all that stuff. But we don't.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, and so what ends up happening is we don't see how intellectually robust his and everything that's going into his vision of reality there. That I think we just need to really, and this is some like personal project I have, is to kind of really do a deeper dive into John Paul II and understand the sources. My wife and I met with Stanislav Grigol out in Krakow once, and we were out there in the big, huge main square of Krakow, and there was a big, statue of Mickiewicz, one of John Paul II's favorite poets, right by us. Yeah. And Stanislav Grigol, he was like into all the Polish Romantic poets and Plato and Dante. And he was insisting our entire conversation on, we need to understand John Paul didn't come out of nowhere. He came out from this poetic tradition. He came out from all the things that were going on in Krakow and all that. And so, and he said, people in Poland still don't know this. So I think we just need to, there's so much work to be done in understanding this vision. So that's why Word on Fire, that's why when they said, hey, we got a fellowship at Word on Fire Education, I saw it as my job to really help like introduce this vision to teachers, which is Bishop Barron's vision. And so many teachers have told me. I just had an education seminar not too long ago, and I gave them I took a risk. I gave them a D.L. Schindler article on the order of intelligence in the academy. And
by the way, he presented that paper at a conference that I held.
Okay.
So anyway, go ahead.
Well, and I had some people email me afterwards. Some people were upset. They're like, "Oh man, you're talking about good pedagogy and you're giving us this article. Clearly you don't know how to teach." But I was like, well, who cares? I'm so eager to share this with you. But some people told me like, "Oh my gosh, I just talked to my friend about this D.L. Schindler guy. They know D.L. Schindler, and there's such a rich." And so the number of people are exploring this a little bit more. And I'm like, okay, good. Just like, let this get out there as widely as possible. And so another thing I'm doing is I'm using Stratford Caldecott as much as possible, because I think that those Arkwood conversations that D.L. Schindler had up in New Hampshire.
Nick Healy's place there.
Yeah. I think this book came out of a lot of those conversations. And so if you want to see like a manifesto of this communal vision for education, I'd pick up Stratford Caldecott.
I would encourage everyone to pick up Stratford Caldecott stuff for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's smart, it's intelligent, it's spot on. Stratford has sadly died of cancer many years ago now, but also because on a personal level, I consider Stratford Caldecott to be the holiest man I've ever met in my life. Truly. A real gentleman, a real saint. And therefore, I would say that what you would read in a book of his, you can guarantee that this is a man who lived it. This is a man who embodied it, and that his words flow out of his being. And so I love, obviously, the late, what we called him, everybody called him Strat. Nice guy. But anyway, D.L. Schindler, also recommend to my viewers, he writes in very dense, metaphysical, turgid language. He's not for the faint of heart. And I do not recommend people who don't have the gift of reading metaphysical writing.
But his son is a good writer.
But so pick up his son's writing, D.C. Schindler, which is sort of a clearer vision of the same thing. Although D.C. goes well beyond his father in a lot of things. But anyway, just a shout out to David L. Schindler, who, in my opinion, is the most underappreciated Catholic intellectual of modern times in the United States. Yeah. And his thought really was a catalyst for a lot of this presentation of John Paul II. So I want to bring it back to what you said about John Paul. I'm going to put this out there. One of the things that most upsets me about the current pontificate, and I am not a rad-trad opponent of Pope Francis. He's not a heretic. I don't even think he's that much of a liberal. He hasn't given the liberals women priests or married priests or contraception, or any of the things that they want. He's kind of sui generis. He's sort of his own dude. And he's an enigma to me. I've stopped trying to figure him out. But there's one thing that I don't like about this pontificate, and I think there has been a deliberate effort to eclipse the teaching of John Paul II. I do. I think there's been a deliberate attempt to just do an end run around John Paul II's intellectual legacy, because it seems to me so much of John Paul's theological legacy of the church is now just sort of stalled in its tracks. The trads don't read him. The liberals don't read him. The communal people read him, but who listens to us?
Yeah.
And that, to me, if you take Vatican II, followed by the vast teaching of John Paul, and you've got the hermeneutic that we need for the modern church, and nobody's paying attention to it.
Yeah. Well, just to kind of like be clear, I don't represent Word on Fire's views on this, but I do remember when
we don't want to get Word on Fire in trouble here.
So the pontifical, John Paul II Institute in Rome. I remember when. You had great teachers like Jose Granados and Livio Molina. And also recognized widely amongst people who even disagreed with him as perhaps the greatest moral theologian of our day, really embodying a Veritatis Splendor and everything John Paul II was trying to bring about. And
Familiaris Consortio.
Yeah. And to see what happened there, just really, quite a
Well, just I'm going to interrupt you for a second. I did write a blog post about it, so if viewers want to go and do on the search engine of my blog, just type in JP2 Institute.
I remember that. Yeah, I remember that. And I this was actually part of the conversation my wife and I had with
Let me interrupt you again. The reason why we're talking about this is because Pope Francis fired all these people that we're talking about,
Yeah, I should.
And replaced them with people that really don't care much for John Paul. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, but going, and this is why I think Stanislav Grigol was in Krakow at the time, because he played a major role at that institute, and he was a student of John Paul II. And by the way, if you really want to get into a very kind of almost unexplored, detailed history of John Paul in Krakow, you should read his book. I think it's My Life with John Paul II. It's very good. But
is it in print? Is it easily?
Yeah. I think it was his series of lectures he gave at the John Paul II Institute in
wow.
Yeah.
I do not have that book, and that is now top of my list of books to get. Thank you for adding to my debt.
Well, it's excellent.
Very good.
But there you just see like how John Paul II's vision. It just needs. It's so rich. It's done so much good, and yeah, it is kind of. I don't pay attention to a lot of these what's going on in the church much, or I don't. I mean, I really appreciate some of Pope Francis's encyclicals.
Oh yeah, they're very profound in many ways.
Oh yeah, I oftentimes kind of stay though out of like the all the debates, because I oftentimes don't even know what the motu proprio. I didn't read the motu proprio fully, and here's my into comments.
So here's my take on Pope Francis with regard to John Paul. I don't think he's opposed to John Paul at all. I think he loved John Paul.
Oh yeah,
John Paul made him a cardinal.
Do you think it's the people around?
No. I think though that Bergoglio, Pope Francis, Jorge Bergoglio, has a deeply, deeply, deeply pastoral soul.
Yeah,
and his mind works in the realm of the practical. It really does. He's not a theoretical thinker. He's not a profound theologian. And this explains why he hasn't given the liberals the doctrinal and disciplinary changes that they want in the church, because he doesn't agree with them.
Yeah.
However, he does consider, I think, the basic doctrines of the church that John Paul was discussing and developing. I think he considers those kind of ideals and sort of very rarefied and good theological theories, but not something that can truly move the ecclesial needle on a pastoral level in the trenches, which is why he talks about accompaniment and all that kind of thing, field hospital, because I think his attitude is all that stuff John Paul did is great, and it's let's keep it, but now we need to talk about how do we live with people in the trenches who are living sinful lives and all these other lives?
Yeah.
That are, so I know that's kind of vague, but that's my take on Pope Francis, where he turns things into ideals. Yeah. And then but the problem with that is that pits doctrine against mercy. It pits theology against the practical. And I think this is a problem.
Yeah. I totally agree. I was reading a foreword to a book on the Eucharist by Tim O'Malley not too long ago, and I think it's Cavadini. I think Cavadini wrote the foreword, and it does a great job of explaining the link between doctrine and the pastoral approach, and how doctrine and practice inform each other. But I remember going back to Schindler again. Schindler had an essay on the ideal and reality, addressing some of the concerns people had about Pope Francis, but trying to have a better understanding of the ideal as not somehow, make believe, and these also something that's impossible for us. But going back to Gaudium et Spes 22 and theological anthropology, if Christ has disclosed for us, the word in flesh, we come to know ourselves in light of the ideal.
Yeah.
Christ. Now I got to be careful here, but it's kind of well, what difference has the revelation of God made for our humanity in the sense like,
Yeah,
and so, I mean, I think that yeah, you got to be very careful if
it's
ideal isn't, yeah,
it's prudential, and you have to be very careful how you apply the sort of gradualism of pastoral practice, where you take someone by the hand and gradually lead them to the truth.
yeah,
But what you don't want is to turn that gradualism into simply saying you don't have to pay attention to
yeah,
the ideal because this is the best that you can do right now, and God's happy with that.
yeah,
That's kind of the problem, right? And
yeah,
I think, but anyway, so there's a whole debate about, it's in John Paul, the distinction between the law of gradualism and the gradualism of the law. Do you know what I'm talking about, or not? Um,
yeah.
where
Help me here.
Well, the law of gradualism is a basic pastoral principle that everybody follows,
Yeah,
any sane pastor follows, where you've got the truth. And like you just said, the truth is what is most pertinent to my reality as human beings. So we don't want to ignore it. I mean, because
hmm
that's what's going to make me happy and healthy. That's going to lead to my beatitude. All right. But I also realize I can't just throw it at somebody and say, okay, now live this, if
yeah,
they're enmeshed in all kinds of craziness. So you have to sort of softly, softly, softly guide. It might take years and years and years, and you accompany someone. This is where Pope Francis is correct.
yeah,
That's called the law of pastoral gradualism. But the gradualism of the law is to say, because of the situation that a person is in, the law itself is no longer really law, in the sense of the ideal. The law itself is now changed, so that where you are in your life right now, if that's the best you can do, that's where God wants you. It's actually God's will for you to be there, and that becomes His law for your life now.
yeah,
And that is wrong. That is where I think some of, not Francis, but some of his followers, I think, err in that direction.
hmm hmm
I think they take Amoris Laetitia and turn it in that direction.
yeah,
But so I don't want to bore my viewers with all that stuff. But we're sort of coming to the end of our session. So let's talk quickly a little bit about your role at Word on Fire. I want to talk about this. What exactly do you do at Word on
yeah.
Fire?
Well, right now we're working on at the institute. We're working on these things called pathways, and so we recognize that we at the institute we have about like 20. I don't know how many. We have like a little bit above 20,000 members. A lot of these members are teachers, and so we figured we got to actually have some content that's specifically directed at them. So right now, I'm actually I'm developing some courses on kind of this theological anthropology 101, some of the things that I find lacking in education, just to kind of help the teachers have a little bit better Catholic philosophy of education, but also like a better understanding of how we view the human being in the light of salvation history. And so I'm doing that. I'm also going to be having a kind of guided reading of Caldicott's works.
Yes.
And I'm also kind of going back to, I'm trying to stress that everybody's a teacher. So I'm trying to get even those people who are not, formal educators into this thing. But there's everybody who we say we're like training evangelists. And sometimes I'm confused a little bit by that. But everybody, insofar as they're like, engaging people. I mean, just being a human being, you're communicating Christ in some way, and you're a teacher. And
Yeah.
so there's a great book called The Art of Teaching by a guy named Gilbert Hyatt. He translated all of like Werner Jaeger's books on Paideia. I like those
Oh yeah.
histories of Greek education.
That's all good stuff. That's
Yeah.
all great stuff.
But I'm not trying to go against that education is a science. That's true. But I also just want to kind of get at that. Well, hey, this is kind of like everybody in some ways does this, and you kind of have to have a knack and know certain principles, to do it well. Like know the subject, like through and through.
Yeah.
Love the students. Actually, know what the students like. And all these other basic things. And he gives all these great.
How about this? Don't be a jerk.
Don't be a jerk. Yeah, I don't think he has that one in there, but I'm sure if he would have met one of the people that we talked about, he would have added that.
But
So
here's the deal. I think I said this in our unrecorded session.
yeah,
My view is that teachers are born and not made,
yeah,
and that it's largely a function of your humanity and your personality. Then it's simply a matter of learning a few skills, but also just mastering your subject matter and loving your students.
yeah, yeah,
Having a passion for your subject matter, knowing it inside and out, loving your students, and then walk into that classroom and just be a human being.
yeah.
And there you go. There's a teach. I was every education professor's worst living nightmare. I was a chalk talk. I was chalk talk lecture sort of guy.
Yeah.
And yet I'll toot my own horn. I was effective.
Now, like I think at the elementary levels, you kind of have to be a disciplinarian. I'm not a very good disciplinarian. Yeah. That's why I would fail there.
I would never succeed as an elementary school teacher. And my hat's off to everybody who can do that. I had some great ones as a child that we all remember our grade school teachers.
Yeah.
Who we always, for better or for worse, but usually for better.
Oh, the last thing really quickly. I know you had Richard DeClue on. He's
sure.
kind of like our Vatican II guy, but we also had, I also like one of the first things I worked on, and hopefully this will eventually come out. I think it's going to come out after some of Richard's stuff, but it's on Vatican II, because like when I came into Word on Fire, I'm like, one of the biggest things all these Catholic schools are saying is that they're in the spirit of Vatican II, Vatican II, Vatican II, Vatican II. But I'm like none of the teachers, nobody knows what Vatican II is really about.
Nor do they even care to know.
That's yes. But we were trying to have kind of a couple. So I did a couple courses on just some of the basics of Vatican II. So for education. So.
Because as Peter Seewald says in his biography of Pope Benedict, Vatican II is not spent. And so on. We don't need a Vatican III. What we need is, he uses the Spanish term, we need a reconquista of Vatican II. Mm-hmm. We need to retrieve it once again. And in all of its radicality. I'm supposed to be writing eventually a book for Word on Fire in Vatican II, but Brandon Vaught, if you're listening, all right, they've already pushed my deadline ahead for me by several months, and I thank them for that because I'm just busy doing things like this. But anyway, hey Robert, I gotta close off.
Yeah,
the session's gonna time out here. It also becomes impossible to process a video that goes on too long.
Okay.
And so thank you so much. Thank you for deciding to re-record this with me. I thought it was a great conversation. We talked about 75% of what we did before, and then added some juicy stuff in there. Otherwise, but anyway, thanks everybody. Thanks everybody. Okay, so I'm going to hit stop record. So don't say anything rude until I tell you.
Okay.
Okay. Stop record.